Welcome to the Bulwark podcast and happy Friday. I'm Charlie Sykes. Obviously, we're going to be talking about what happened last night with the January 6th committee. It was supposed to be the final hearing, but they announced that they were getting so much new information, they were going to be continuing the investigation. And as Liz Cheney closed the session last night, she said, "See you in September." So to sort all of this out, and there's a hell of a lot to sort out. Of course, we're joined by Tim Miller because it is Friday, and Tim Miller is in Denver today. So happy Mile High City there, Tim.
It is so good to be home, to be here in the Mile High City. I was here last night for a rollicking crowd at the Tattered Cover Bookstore. The air conditioning was broken, but it was 100 degrees here in Denver. People braved that. People put the January 6th committee on DVR like I did.
Wow.
And yet we still had a huge crowd, ton of Bulwark people. It was really special. It was this bookstore that I used to, as a kid, go and, hide in the stacks and sit in the corner and read whatever, basketball books, biographies of Bobby Knight, whatever I was into when I was 12 years old. So it was super special. Denver, the crowd was popping.
Which bookstore?
The Tattered Cover.
Okay, that's like a legendary bookstore.
Legendary,
That's legendary. Okay, so let's start with it because Tim, I don't even know whether we're going to get to everything that we need to get to here. We could devote the entire podcast to running Josh Hawley. Seriously, I tweeted out almost immediately after that was posted saying this is a meme for the ages, and of course it is. And this is one of those times when Twitter really steps up, and people within moments were able to put a soundtrack to Josh Hawley running away from the protesters to Chariots of Fire, and of course my favorite the Benny Hill theme and all of that. So we could devote the entire thing to that, but. Let's save it for later, okay?
We're going to save it? Okay, all right.
Something to look forward to. All right, but before we get in, I just wanted to start with Liz Cheney's closing remarks because once again, I'm sorry if we've heard this before or if I've said this before, but Liz Cheney just continues to just impress. What a remarkable woman. Her clarity and her willingness to go there, to just not gild this up with a lot of emotionalism, but just to lay out this case. So let's play the first Liz Cheney cut that we have.
Tonight, you saw an American president faced with a stark and unmistakable choice between right and wrong. There was no ambiguity, no nuance. Donald Trump made a purposeful choice to violate his oath of office, to ignore the ongoing violence against law enforcement, to threaten our constitutional order. There is no way to excuse that behavior. It was indefensible. And every American must consider this. Can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again?
Boy, that cuts right to the heart of the matter, doesn't it, Tim?
Liz is just so tough. So we came back and watched this at on DVR late in Denver. I was watching with my husband. He's looking at me, and he's a Democrat. This is not a Liz Cheney fan going into this, and he's like, she is just like a dog on the bone. And I said, she's going to follow this guy to the gates of hell. Like she's going to do whatever it takes to Donald Trump. I think for the rest of her life. The case is so clear, and we can kind of get into the contrast between Liz Cheney and everybody else in the party of cravenness. But the thing that strikes me from that is that we do have a little bit of the split screen this morning, which is the answer to her rhetorical question is obviously no. This is not a person that can be entrusted with power ever again, and yet we have a 2024 poll out that has Donald Trump beating Joe Biden right now. 2024 polls, who knows, right? But still, this is a sign. Tens upon tens of millions of people are looking the other way over what we all are watching last night, and it's pretty horrifying to imagine. And I think that you can't really hold anyone accountable for that, except for the fact that there's only two Liz Cheneys and Adam Kinzingers, right? That is really the explanation for this. It's hard to come up with any other answer.
Well, I thought one of the interesting things they did last night with the very first witness that they called was Mr. Mitch McConnell from the state of
Yeah.
Kentucky. And, watching the comments from Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy in real time, and then contrasting it to what they're saying now and what they're doing now is rather stark. Also, Liz Cheney did make one more cut here where
Yeah.
she talks about the witnesses and, I and drags Kevin McCarthy a little bit. In fact, there was a lot of pretty good dragging of Kevin McCarthy last night. But this is what she said about the witnesses.
The case against Donald Trump in these hearings is not made by witnesses who were his political enemies. It is instead a series of confessions by Donald Trump's own appointees, his own friends, his own campaign officials,
He has no friends.
people who worked for him for years, and his own family. They have come forward and they have told the American people the truth. And for those of you who seem to think the evidence would be different if Republican leader McCarthy had not withdrawn his nominees from this committee, let me ask you this. Do you really think Bill Barr is such a delicate flower that he would wilt under cross-examination? Pat Cipollone, Eric Hirschman, Jeff Rosen, Richard Donahue, of course they aren't. None of our witnesses are.
Yeah, it's again, she just sort of lays it out here rather starkly. So, and again, this is one of the things that I think has been the power, the strength of the committee is that these are all Republicans, these are all voices coming from inside the House. But as you point out, um, the ability of Republicans to not pay attention to this or not and not take on board the implications of this is truly extraordinary. And when I was on a Canadian radio show this morning, and I said, of course, you get asked the question, well, will this make a difference? I said, well, why would you think now, given all of the other opportunities they have had to break for this guy, all of the other off ramps, what makes you think that Kevin McCarthy will wake up, stare at the ceiling, and say, oh, God, what have I done? Right? I mean, it's just not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen, but it doesn't mean that we can't have righteous fury about it. Look, the committee's done a great job as far as all of these being witnesses that are Trump supporters for the most part, or at least Republicans or conservatives of good standing, almost to a person with very few exceptions. I think I have some nitpicks with some of the witnesses, particularly from last night, which we can get into, Matt Pottinger. But they went out of their way to present a case where the evidence was being put forth entirely by people in Trump's circle, right? And not at all by, bulwarky people, right? And so you would think that might have a influence. But here, the problem is that everyone in the apparatus around them, from Fox to the conservative media to all these other members of Congress, are just MIA. And unwilling to do anything about it. And here's where we landed. I was working on something on this, but we are really in that old Washington Post quote, what's the downside for humoring him? Everyone else, except that we're in what's the downside for humoring him forever, yeah, right? Forever. Like that's where all these guys are. Like we saw what the downside for humoring him was. We saw the violence at the Capitol.
9 dead people.
Yeah. And yet they're all still doing it. And this is just the enraging thing last night. I don't know what was happening in your emotions as you were watching this, Charlie. Maybe I was a little raw nerve having, had to do a book reading in front of my mother. But I came home and I'm like, number one, Donald Trump should be in jail. I don't have any hope that he's going to be in jail, but he should be in jail. And the second about that Cipollone testimony, that was the moment that it's like, this man should be in jail. But number two, the other enraging thing is just like, why is Liz Cheney carrying this burden alone and Adam Kinzinger? Yeah. Like, why? It's so obvious. It's not a close call. All of these guys knew it. And yet they're playing with fire again for the same exact reason that they did so on January 6th. They want their House majority. They want their Senate majority. And they're worried that if they all would bail on him now, that the party would fracture and that wouldn't happen. I don't even know if that's the case, by the way. But that is their logic. They're still in what's the downside for humoring him. They're hoping that he's going to die of a heart attack, like in the Leibovich book, that he's just going to disappear. Yep. And we're playing with the most dangerous fire imaginable all over again. It's absolutely maddening.
And by the way, for people who think that that's just that that you're exaggerating there, I do think that there is that sense among Republicans that, okay, this may be bad, but something will happen to save us from this. A meteor will strike. I mean, he will die of a heart attack. He will choke on a Big Mac. Merrick Garland will save us from him, but it won't happen.
The great
So
Ron DeSantis
the great run.
will
Okay,
save
so
us.
I wanted to pick up on something you dropped there.
Yep.
In terms of the culpability of Donald Trump. You mentioned something Pat Cipollone said that triggered you.
Yeah, well, it was what he didn't say. To me, I thought the most powerful part of the testimony was accidental by Cipollone. I don't have a lot of strong feelings for Cipollone. There was the Mick Mulvaney tweet during the hearings. It was like, thank goodness we had people like Pat Cipollone in there. I'm kind of going, are we sure? I mean, are we sure? What did we do? Donald Trump sat there for 3 hours and watched TV, and then he put out a terrible video. I was like, well, if someone else had been in there besides Pat, he would have watched TV for 4 hours, 5? Anyway, didn't seem like there was a lot of action items for the good guys with the guns inside the White House during January 6th. But anyway, the Pat Cipollone moment that really stood out to me was when Liz Cheney asked him, was there anybody in the White House who didn't think that it was incumbent on them to tell people to leave the Capitol and to try to do everything possible to get people out of the Capitol? And then Cipollone goes on and says, no, I don't think so. And he starts listing people, and so I know this person wanted us out, and Kaylee, I think even, and he's like, for the most part, I think even Mark Meadows did. And then he starts listing all the people on his staff. We all wanted him out. And then there's like this awkward pause, and Adam Schiff comes in and says, well, what about the president? Like, did the president want them out? And then Pat Cipollone, I mean, I don't know how long it actually was, but it felt like two minutes. He's conferring with his lawyer. It's quiet. He's hemming and hawing. He sits back in his chair. He leans forward, thinks about what he says, looks at the camera, and kind of just shrugs and just says, I have executive privilege on this. Yeah. And it's like, and that's the president's own lawyer basically saying that the president wanted to let the people, the violent rioters, stay in the Capitol. And this is, to me, that was the moment I was just, and I've always said, I wish he could be in jail. I don't think it's going to happen, but like, this is jail, right? I mean, this in another setting, this is just the CEO of a company. If this is Eric Prince and it's his little militia, like, this is jail.
This was also my takeaway from this, that I went in thinking that they were going to document the dereliction of duty, his failure to act. But in the end, it was way worse than that. And our colleague Amanda Carpenter points out, it's just not true that he did nothing. There's a double negative there. But he actually was doing things, including, putting out the tweet about Mike Pence. But I mean, this is why the timeline was valuable. So you have the timeline. The Capitol Police are fighting for their lives against the rioters. These Secret Service agents who are guarding Mike Pence are so in fear for their lives, they're calling their loved ones to say goodbye. Legislators are fleeing for safety, hiding under desks. And the president of the United States is sitting in his dining room, and he's refusing all of these pleas to call it off. I mean, for hour after hour, he watches television. He never calls the military, never calls anybody from the National Guard or any of that. But he did do some things. He's dialing senators, urging them to delay the certification of the vote. And then, of course, at the height of the chaos and the terror, he inflames the mob by sending out that tweet attacking Mike Pence. I mean, really, people should let this all settle in. He didn't call off the mob because the mob was doing exactly what he wanted them to do. They had stopped the certification, and then he decided that he was going to exploit that moment to lobby his allies to execute the coup. And it was only after it was pretty obvious the assault on the Capitol had failed that he bothered to call off the insurrection. And, as Will Salatin, writes this morning
and
as
even
well.
Ish.
Yeah, Ish. Writes, you really get a sense of how much he relished the violence and how reluctant he was. And we saw in that blooper reel that he refuses to say the election's over, even after the violence and after the congressional vote, to certify Biden's victory. So, I mean, all of this, it is so overwhelming. And this is the enraging part. If it was more ambiguous, maybe you could say, okay, I can understand how people, might want to, cut him some slack on this. I can't. And so the acquiescence in Trump becomes more enraging. But I want to ask
really quick on the blooper reel before you ask me the specific thing, because before we lose it, there was one moment in the blooper reel that really stood out to me. Do you know what it was? After he, said, "I want to take out the election is over" line, there was a disembodied voice that comes through of Ivanka Trump.
Yeah.
And, you know, we keep having to hear about how Ivanka was always in there nudging him to do the right thing. And the voice wasn't to say, no, dad, sorry, daddy, but you got to say the election's over. It was to say, okay, so how about we just do like, now Congress has certified, you know, she offers some completely other thing. I just got a kick out of the fact that like you get an Ivanka Shank on the side too. And it's like,
Well,
this was a person who's like trying to make it seem like she was, you know, helping nudge things the right direction. But at that key point, nothing, you know, that's fine.
Well, I had the sense that you were just listening to somebody nudging a toddler, you know, when you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
right.
okay, so you can't have the lollipop now, but if you do this, that sort
Yeah,
of thing." You
exactly.
know, so I don't know these guys at all. Maybe you do, and I think this dovetails with what you read about in your book. I was really struck by these text messages between Tim Murtaugh, who was the communications director for the Trump reelection campaign,
Oh, yeah, I
and,
know these guys.
okay, and a guy named Matthew Wolking, who's a campaign spokesman. Now, this is a few days after the attack. And so Murtaugh, again, guy who was the communications director for the Trump reelect, you know, he's talking about Trump's failure to even acknowledge the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. And he says, you know, it's also shitty not to have even acknowledged the death of the Capitol Police Officer. And Wolking writes back, that is enraging to me. Everything he said about supporting law enforcement was a lie. And then Murtaugh, in this burst of real clarity, you know, about this man that he had devoted his life to support, right? Explains the shitty silence about a dead police officer. And I'll just read you this text. It says, you know what that is, of course. If he acknowledged the dead cop, he'd be implicitly faulting the mob, and he wouldn't do that because they're his people. And he would be close to acknowledging that what he lit at the rally got out of control. No way he acknowledges something that could ultimately be called his fault. No way. Now, what I wrote this morning was, well, exactly. And it took you this long to realize who Donald Trump really was. So give me the Tim Miller, dive into the mind of someone like Tim Murtaugh, who has devoted his life to giving 4 more years of power to Donald Trump, and yet having this level of understanding of what a shitty, seditious asshole he was.
Yeah, I do know these guys. Tim Murtaugh actually worked with back in 2005. It's completely another world. Campaign of a guy named Jerry Kilgore, very kind of normal, boring Republican in Virginia. And Matt Wolking is kind of a conservative turd troll. But anyway, this text, it reminded me of specifically one person that I wrote about in the book, which was Josh Holmes, who's a McConnell advisor. And these texts are happening around the same time. You might remember this, but Holmes tweets a couple days after that, you know, if you're not in a white hot rage by now, I don't know what would make you that upset. And I thought that was interesting because some people pushed back at me on this. And I said, you know, and they thought it was, you know, angling or posturing or whatever. And I said, I don't think so. I think that, you know, Murtaugh and Holmes and a number of people that worked for Trump were legitimately angry in the days after January 6th, angry that he embarrassed them, angry because say what you want about people that worked for Donald Trump. Most people who got into politics just still do have this kind of love of the country and like they got into it for a reason, and to see the Capitol stormed and shit on makes them mad. So, you know, it is this kind of combination of genuine emotions plus this career failing, and they were mad at him. Like they were actually mad at this guy. And so this is what is happening in these texts. He's like, and then he doesn't even mention the cops. And so there are two questions of this. Like, one, why did they go along with this? Why did they go along with something so obvious all that time, which is when you ask. But then the other question, which is, why are all of these guys back in his graces right now? I mean, you don't see Josh Holmes out there tweeting about how, you know, Donald Trump should have been convicted. Tim Murtaugh is working for Jason Miller at Getter right now. Matt Wolking's a Twitter troll on behalf of Republican candidates. None of them are tweeting that they were enraged last night. Like, why?
And let's throw Brad Parscale in there
Parscale,
as well, who was saying he was trying to start a civil war and people would die. And he's back totally. He's working for Trump again for the super PAC.
Yes. I mean, literally, the Parscale tweet should be like the paperback introduction to my book. I don't need to write a new introduction. I just have the tweet where it's like, on the one hand, it's Parscale saying Donald Trump's responsible for deaths in a civil war. And then the next tweet is Parscale's running Donald Trump's PAC for 2024. they are part of this culture, this, what I call the cartel cashers. They're making money, but also the team players, the tribalist trolls, right? They have their entire identity, their careers is entirely wrapped up in succeeding in this game. And so for a moment after January 6th, they all thought, fuck this guy. We're going to be able to get rid of him. He's embarrassed me. He's embarrassed the country, and we can just move on to Ron DeSantis or whatever. And we're going to get out of this kind of clean. We're not Officer Sicknick's family. We can move on. But 2 weeks later, when they realized that the base, that the conservative media, that their bosses, are all going to come groveling back to Donald Trump, they're faced with the same choice they've been faced with for 6 years, which is, do I take off my team jersey? Do I do a whole career shift? Do I change my identity? Or do I just put this in a little box and rationalize it just like I did Charlottesville, just like I did Lafayette Square, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And so these guys have contorted themselves in their brains so much that they feel like they've left themselves no choice. I think the analogy I made in the book to Holmes was like, it's like you're in this. Did you watch the show Squid Game? It's so good.
No, I didn't.
You have to go watch Squid Game. Squid Game is like this death competition. And anyway, I don't want to do a spoiler, but you're so deep in this game that increasingly every moral sacrifice, becomes necessary, because like bailing at this point, the cost becomes too high. And so it makes you very, very upset to read the text. But what's more maddening is to know that all of these guys are doing the same exact shit they were doing on January 5th right now.
Hey, BA fam. It's Tiffany and Mandy from the Brown and Bitch podcast, and we have some exciting news for you. For the first time ever, we are going live on YouTube. When?
Head to www.youtube.com/Cumulus podcast at noon Eastern on July 28th to join us, Brown Ambition, live.
If you haven't heard, July 28th is when we get our first clues as to whether or not we are really in a recession. And who better to break it all down than your personal financial sisters?
If you have a question about the recession, we got your back. The Brown Ambition live recession reaction show, Thursday, July 28th, noon Eastern on YouTube, and everywhere you get your podcasts after that.
Okay, so deep breath, clearing my my throat here, Tim.
Yeah.
Because you're rather harsh on these guys, but I think you're not harsh enough.
Okay, great.
Because I'm looking at these guys, listening to your explanation and going, okay, there's lots of, these guys are whores. I mean, isn't that ultimately what it comes down to? They are fucking crack whores. And they know better, but they're going to do it because this is what a political whore does. Right? I mean, isn't that...
I think it's I mean, I don't know. I think it's probably worse than that. Yeah, it's worse than that. Probably most actual prostitutes need the money, right? And maybe are doing it because they need to survive. These guys are whores for fun. For the rush, for the kick, right? I mean, they don't even, these are all privileged, successful white dudes. Like, they could all go fucking be the PR person for Clorox if they want and make $200,000 a year and have a nice life, like that. It's even worse. Yeah. I mean, yes, they are selling themselves to somebody that they know is that they know is awful. But yeah, yeah.
Well, that's why I said crack whore, because, instead of, dealing in cash, what, they say is, okay, in exchange for my committing this humiliating act with you, we can just give me a little bit more of that dopamine rush of being in the room, of being relevant, of being, being a Josh Holmes, troll, that sort of thing. I mean, that's the only explanation I come up with, because as I read the Murtaugh analysis, I'm thinking, this guy gets it. He sees it very, very clearly. But the problem is these people who see it very, very clearly are seeing it very clearly in January 2021. And as you talk about, so what were they not seeing in 2016 and 2017 and 2018 and 2019 throughout the year 2020? And then suddenly it dawns on them, oh my God, this guy's a fucking monster. How did this happen? I mean,
what are they doing in July of 2022? I mean, this is the banality of evil, right? This is the Hannah Arendt stuff, right? Like, this is why it's worse than whores, because it's evil. It's evil. Like, it is the person, and it is, obviously there's some weaknesses to this analogy, but it is the upper management of a autocrat's regime, rationalizing I did my MBS episode this week, right? It's the dude that's rationalizing the bone saw killings. It's like, well, the boss has got to go along with this because the boss can't seem weak, right? I mean, it's evil.
It's like the old joke. So if it gave you, $10 to go along with the bone saw thing, would you do it? Well, that would be terrible. What if I gave you $10 million? Well, let's talk.
What was the old, I forget what was the old psychology test about, you're sitting in one room with a button, and like you have a boss telling you to press the button and turn the button higher and higher, and you're told that someone's in the other room and is getting electric shocked, and like 60% of the people just keep shocking up into the level of the person's death because they keep going on with it. I mean, it's really more along those lines, right? How can you just think about how debased of a human? So last night at the book event, people are asking me, and I think this is a question I get a lot, right? Which is like, how can I reconnect with my uncle or friend or whatever that like voted for Donald Trump and went along with this? And the thing I always say in this case is, regular voters you shouldn't hold every single person accountable in the same way that we hold Brad Carskell. It's like the people that I'm writing about in this book are people who know better, who told us they know better, who said they know better over and over again, who whisper to their friends that they know better to make themselves feel better, and then they go along with it anyway every step of the way. Fuck those guys to hell. And that is Brad Carskell, right? Like, that is the situation. It's like, I know he's responsible for this death. I know he wants to do a civil war, and yet I'm still running a PAC again to get him elected again. I mean, that is evil. That is different. Like, that is a different category than, Uncle Robbie just like really likes the tweets,
Okay, so we're going to have to brainstorm this. Tim Miller's next book will either be called Worse Than Whores or Fuck These Guys to Death. What's it going to be? Okay,
the latter one sounds like that's another bestseller. So I don't know. That's the leader in the clubhouse.
Okay, so Tim, the Josh Hawley thing. I mean, this was as Philip Bump from the Washington Post said. If you ever wondered what it would look like to see a congressional committee say "fuck you" to one of their colleagues, there it is. They ran the Josh Hawley video, which is a meme for the ages. Now, they didn't have to do this, but they chose to do it. And it was like, wow, this gives you an indication of kind of the mood in the room that they're showing what a retromingen hack this guy is. Of all of our colleagues, did you read what Mona Charen wrote about this? I mean, Mona Charen, who was probably literally wearing pearls when she wrote this, she goes, the hearings have been a model of dignity and seriousness. There haven't been cheap shots, maudlin appeals, low demagoguery that are all too common. But there was one moment in last night's presentation that brought a moment of schadenfreude. The image of Josh Hawley's disgusting raised fist to the mob, followed by shots of him running for his life. Hawley was the first senator to announce he would object to the certification of electoral college votes. The perfidious coward deserved it, and more frankly. And then she writes, he's a stand-in for all of the spineless Republicans who brought us to the brink of a constitutional crisis. So, Josh Hawley, if the guy actually had any sense of shame, he would realize that he is a national joke today, but I think that's unlikely.
Boy, I don't know. He's got to be pretty embarrassed. Firstly, we have to do a slow clap for Elaine Luria, because the way that she just deadpanned it,
beautiful.
And I almost needed to rewind because I forget it was a total shank out of nowhere.
Right? I was yelling like, "Whoa, no, you are not! Oh my, whoa!"
Yeah, because it's like she was talking about someone fleeing, and it was like completely unrelated, and then she just goes, "Speaking of fleeing." There was Senator Josh Hawley, and so it was like, I was like, "This is a transition. You have a future in podcasting, ma'am. If you don't, if the congressional seat gets boring." But awesome. It was wonderful the way she did it, and it's important to just think about who this Josh Hawley is, and to really just appreciate how phony this all is. I wrote about Carrie Lake a few weeks ago about how she's in MAGA drag. Like this guy is a MAGA drag queen. I mean, and this is not, none of this is real. Okay. This is all just a performative act. The white power fist, that limp fist that he put up in the air was a performative act. Josh Hawley went to Rockhurst Jesuit in Kansas City. Josh Hawley's my age. I'm like, I know this person. He went to Rockhurst. Okay, he went to the Ivy League. He took a gap year where he went and traveled to London, where he went to St. Mark's School on the River Thames. He went to Stanford.
Just basic blue collar story. Man of the people, populist guy.
One of my favorite leaked pictures of Josh Hawley, he's wearing a tight T-shirt at a wine store. I'm kind of like looking at the different bottles on the top shelf. This is not a MAGA person, okay? This is not, one of these Proud Boys who stormed the Capitol. This is a prissy little wuss who thought that he could use his fake populist fervor to advance his political career, and he just isn't quite as good at faking it as Elise Stefanik, and it's really pretty. I mean, I do think that it will be embarrassing to him forever, because here's the thing. It might not be embarrassing. I think he's moved his family. They're doing like a little house on the prairie thing in Missouri, which is fine. But this is, again, he's a Stanford guy. He's a London guy. It's going to be hard for people not to chuckle at him in these rooms where he wishes that he could be going forward.
There's just something about just watching the bully running that is, deeply satisfying, and it's satisfying. Well, and then somebody made the point here, and I should give credit if I remembered who it was, but when he's protected, when he knows that the Capitol Police have his back, he's prepared to be I'm showing my strength by giving you the fist to this crowd and everything, and yet when he's vulnerable, just like every other Republican, he's running because he's terrified of his own base. I mean, this is it. He's like, oh no.
You couldn't have really scripted. It's literally like the 80s. It feels like it's School Ties. I mean, it's like almost cliche. How many 80s movies had prep school D-bags, doing anti-Semitic jokes and bullying people, and then all of a sudden they get pushed to the ground and start crying. This is Josh Hawley. Like Josh Hawley is every 80s teen movie prepster bully coward in history, right?
I've always thought that the best way to think of Donald Trump is to think of him as Biff in Back to the Future.
Right.
I mean, he really is. He's literally the Biff.
He literally is Biff.
He literally is Biff. Okay, so let's just talk about some of the other people that we saw, from Trump world who testified, because I know you have some notes on them. So
I do have some notes.
Matt Pottinger, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor. You had Sarah Matthews, who was a Deputy Press Secretary, and we had Eugene Scalia, who is the Secretary of Labor. So let's walk through them and let's put them through the Tim Miller "Why We Did It" analysis.
Should we do favorite to least favorite or least favorite to favorite?
I want to start with I want to start with Pottinger.
Pottinger, okay. This guy sucks. I mean, this guy sucks. I'm trying hard, Charlie. I'm trying hard to be the shepherd. I'm trying hard to welcome people into our embrace. This is important. I dealt with the Pawn Save America bros the other day, and I tried to lecture them and say, hey, you got to be a little bit kinder to converts. Okay. Like we've got, big tent. The risk is so high here. The risk is so great. And so I'm doing my best. I'm going to just keep some of my thoughts about Matt Pottinger on the inside. I know that doesn't make for good podcast content. But man, he made it hard. He made it hard. Having to listen to his whole resume, having to listen to him brag about all the great things Donald Trump did. This is the thing that bothers me. That Tim Murtaugh. No, you want to? Yeah, I mean, he was in all these rooms. He's in all these rooms for 5 years. He was there. He was on the Deputies Committee, which he reminded us several times, when Donald Trump sided with Vladimir Putin at Helsinki over our security services. He's continued to stay after that, and he kind of praised Donald Trump's, broad-shouldered leadership. I mean, this guy, we all knew that he was a dangerous loose cannon risk from the jump, from the escalator. Yeah. Trump.
Right. Well, yeah.
And so this notion that, okay, if you would have been there and said, hey, we ended up getting some good policies in spite of Trump. Anyway, I don't know. I worry just about this. There was a lot of papering over what happened before January 6th. I wish he could have maybe just kept his testimony to what he thought about January 6th. I didn't need to know his thoughts about Donald Trump's policies on the 2018. I get why they did it. But because he's not trying to reach me. Okay, they wanted someone like Matt Pottinger there because they want to reach people who do think that Donald Trump had a good presidency.
And he had to establish his credentials as being, otherwise I am a Trumpist. For those people out there, and we know who they are, the anti-Trump people who are like, we need to separate the man from the policies, and so he was clearly in that world. But I know this bothered a lot of people, and I don't know why I'm.
Please, give me a good. I want to be nice. I want to be nice. So tell me, make the pitch.
No, I don't want you to be nice. I actually thought that, the fact that he was a, Trumpist in some ways strengthens the critique in the same way that some of the most devastating testimony comes from people like, Bill Barr. I mean, you and I can both go off an entire, podcast, which we have done, talking about Bill Barr, and what a, I'm not even going to use all the words here. Although I will say that we have now crossed a line that the major networks of American television and the Congress of the United States has allowed the word motherfucker.
That was nice.
I mean, I blame David French for this. But so for us on this podcast to be concerned about the language. But the thing about Bill Barr is because he was so deep in that world, because he had gone so far, when he says, yes, but this is nuts, it ought to carry some weight. So I guess if I'm willing to understand the value and the damage that Bill Barr does, then, I mean, who am I to cavil at Pottinger?
Yeah, okay. Okay. I don't want to have a beer with him, but it's fine.
Oh, I definitely don't. No.
Yeah, thank goodness, I guess, that he was there. It's unclear. I guess I'll just have one other nitpick on Pottinger is that we're going through the timeline, and this applies to Cipollone and a lot of these guys, and I felt like there was just this little bit of a disconnect between my emotions and theirs. I know that they're all under testimony and under oath, but it's like Matt Pottinger is the deputy national security advisor. And so then they show all these, what's happening on the internal chain of the security people. And they're like, the Capitol is being stormed. And, Mike Pence's security is asking us to tell their families they love them. And, our lives are at risk. And all of these horrors are happening at the Capitol. And then they go to, that's 246. I'm making these numbers up. I don't remember them off the top of my head. And then it's like at 247, Donald Trump tweets, Mike Pence, go to hell. And then it's like, Matt Pottinger, what were you thinking during this time? And it's like, well, I didn't think that tweet was particularly helpful. It's like, you didn't think it was helpful?
Well,
I mean, you were the deputy national security advisor. Shouldn't you have been storming the dining room and saying, we need to save these people? Your job is to save the Capitol. What were you doing? He's like, I rolled into the office and I saw the tweet and what were these people doing? Why was Donald Trump?
But he was going to quit. He was going to walk out. He was going to leave.
But he stayed there till he was there as 247 before he quits. Doesn't he have a job to kind of go try to take a pass at the president? I didn't hear any testimony for him that was like, and then I walked into the dining room where Donald Trump had his belly out and was was eating a hamburger and was watching TV. And I was like, hey, motherfucker. Why don't we try to save the people at the Capitol? You're the president of the United States. I'm the deputy national security advisor. Shouldn't we be That's what I was hoping for. I wasn't hoping for didn't love that tweet.
Okay.
That's just me. That's just me. That's just me. But okay, I'm happy that he testified.
So Sarah Matthews, your notes on her.
She was fantastic. This is the difference. She's a deputy press secretary. I know they both have the word deputy in them, but there is a little bit of a difference between the deputy press secretary, a 26-year-old whose job it is to wrangle the press and put together media advisories. Okay, when I was 25, my job was booking people on radio, okay, or pitching blogs and trying to get my boss on Charlie Sykes' show in Wisconsin and being told no. This was my job when I was 25. So this is not a person that had, this is not a person that had, responsibilities to save the Capitol. And yet she seemed to have a sense of urgency a little bit. She's cussing at her colleagues, saying, I don't think it looks like we're winning. She's asking her boss, can't you go back in there and tell the president he needs a stronger thing? She is, I think, speaking very clearly. I didn't hear from her testimony like a lengthy exegesis on all of the great things that she thinks that Donald Trump did or her past work on Capitol Hill. So I think that there was a pretty stark contrast between the testimony and what one person's actions were compared to their responsibilities. So anyway, okay, that's fine. I'm not constraining, but I also just want to say, and this I think is really important. These were people that should not have been in this situation. This is the difference for me. Matt Pottinger decided to be the deputy national security advisor. He was there 4 years. He knew what he was signing up for. These were young women who were assistants who showed more courage than their bosses. Kaylee is on Fox right now. Mark Meadows is selling his soul. There were a lot of adults all over the place. And unfortunately, these key testimonies about the president's absolute abdication of duty was being put forth by 25-year-old, 26-year-old assistants.
Yeah.
And so I give them a lot of credit. And I think that they have risked a lot where these assholes, Murtaugh and Wolking, and you go down, Jason Miller, you can go down the list. Their bosses have risked nothing and no one, to use Khizr Khan's reference.
Okay, Eugene Scalia.
That's almost like a comedy thing. I was like, did you remember that he was the Secretary of Labor?
No, not at all.
So I'm very serious. Nice job to end on Scalia, because I have very strong views on both polls, on Matthews and Pottinger. Scalia, it's like they bring him in at the end, and he's like, I was like, are you Buster from Arrested Development, or were you a secretary in the cabinet of Donald Trump? I don't know. And he's like, well, I felt like I needed to stay in there, after January 6th because we needed to make sure that the adults were in charge. And I'm like, does Donald Trump even know who you are? Like, could Donald Trump pick you out of a lineup? If we put you and like 3 other bald Italians in a lineup, could Donald Trump pick out who his Secretary of Labor was? I don't think so. I mean, clearly Pete Hegseth had more chance of getting Donald Trump to behave than Gene Scalia. And I don't, I guess he's like, well, we might want to do the 25th Amendment. It's like, well, did you? Did they try to do it? And then when they didn't, did you quit? Did you quit then? No. So you're just testifying now under oath that you. Okay. I mean, I guess fine that we had Eugene in there. I don't know that it mattered one way or the other.
No, it didn't matter.
It felt very Veepish. He's like walking into the room, and it's like, good thing Eugene's here. I wrote a memo. I wrote a memo to Don and told him to be nicer. Didn't land.
And we should have a meeting of the cabinet, which I'm sure would really sober Donald Trump up. Okay, so Tim, I have mixed takes on Mike Pence. Let me just tell you. So I think that, again, some of this is not new, but his forceful sort of seizing the reins of the moment of, calling the military and telling them, that they had to clear the Capitol, felt like he was being presidential. I mean, he had no actual legal authority to do what he was doing, but since Donald Trump completely abdicated his responsibilities, Mike Pence stepped up, and I thought, okay, good for Mike Pence. This is great. The flip side of this is that as you hear more about how much in danger he was and his bodyguard detail and perhaps members of his family. I mean, this was certainly one of the emotional, gut punches of the evening, was listening to, some of the chatter going back and forth. Although, could I just parenthetically mention, it would certainly be good now to see the text messages of the Secret Service agents that have been disappeared, especially as we're now hearing that they were so frightened that many of them were reaching out to their loved ones. There was this terror. Given all of that, Mike Pence's failure to show up and testify before this committee, his failure to be more outspoken about this, I think feels a lot worse.
Yeah.
Okay, it's one thing for your life to be in danger, and you did some good things that day, but the people around you who were sworn to defend you were put in great danger of their lives. If this is not a moment for you to draw this really bright red line and sit down there, do what 26-year-old Cassidy Hutchinson was willing to do, yes. Or Sarah Matthews. These young women were willing to tell their story, and you are not. So I guess I felt better about Pence in one way and worse in this other respect. What's
Yeah,
your take here?
you can do both, right? And he showed courage and determination that day, and that's true. He also is now continuing to enable Donald Trump and do all the things that got us there. Humans contain multitudes, right? And so does Mike Pence. And so, yeah, he should testify. I've said this several times, and I don't understand why he's not testifying. I guess I do. It's because he
Yeah.
thinks that he's going to win a primary or whatever, which is preposterous. So I also think that just this notion, he didn't have the authority to do what he did that day also, right? And should not this call for some reflection? Isn't he obligated to testify and be a participant in a review over what happens when the president of the United States is on the side of domestic terrorists? Like, does the vice president have control? Didn't they have to actually technically speaking, now I'm not saying that I wanted this to happen, but like technically speaking, for Mike Pence to be able to give orders to Mark Milley, didn't they need to actually call a cabinet meeting and do the 25th Amendment or right? I don't know either. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I think so. That's all part of this too, like part of a review of what happens when you have a madman in the White House. So he hasn't. I just want to add one other person on this. The committee has been so meticulous that I understand why the January 6th committee wouldn't want to do this. But I'd be interested to hear, the next time you talk to Kinzinger, why is there any consideration of calling McCarthy and just asking him to relay what happened on that phone call with Donald Trump? He doesn't have executive privilege, to my knowledge, right? I guess he could call it, and we can then I guess we go into courts forever and ever. But that this is again another person. Seems like Kevin McCarthy has some pretty key evidence here, because when Donald Trump was channel surfing between Newsmax and Fox, McCarthy is one of the few people that we know for sure he talked to.
Well, and McCarthy is described as being scared, which I thought was, and he called Jared Kushner, who for some unaccountable reason was showering in the middle of the day, and gets out of the shower. So we have the mental image of Jared Kushner with a towel around him, talking to Kevin McCarthy.
Mid-afternoon shower, not much to do. He's like, hey, look at this. The Capitol's being stormed. Maybe the interns might need to get back into the White House.
Well, I am now speculating, and I'm out over my skis on all of this. I'm sure I can come up with a couple of more cliches here, but my guess is the reason they're not going harder after McCarthy is because they know that there's a chance that he will be speaker, and there's going to be this massive blowback retaliation. But there also seems to be the kind of all out of fucks to give attitude when it comes to dragging McCarthy, dragging Josh Hawley. So we'll see. But I think they should have. And I guess I am increasingly frustrated at this sort of notion that, well, if somebody is in Congress or they are a former president or a presidential candidate, that somehow we need to have a different set of rules for the way we're going to apply the law. Well, screw that. I mean, honestly, that this whole thing about, well, if Donald Trump runs for president again, this makes an indictment less likely. Okay, wait, why? I mean, I understand all the reasons, but think through what you're saying here. You have Joe Schmoes that are going to jail or being indicted for all sorts of things, technical violations of the law. You have hundreds of people who are going to jail or having their livelihoods destroyed because they followed Donald Trump's call to invade the Capitol. And yet somehow, because Donald Trump wants to seize power again, that we need to be very careful about applying the law to him. I mean, that's really bullshit. And I'm becoming more and more impatient at this idea that the president or former president or candidate for president somehow is in a special legal category that does not include you and me and any other American that is breaking the law. So I'm sorry, I'm not cutting the DOJ any slack on this. Where are you at on this?
Yeah, again, I'm not. This is not my area of expertise. Like what DOJ norm should be here. I defer to Wittes, who is an expert on this, has been more patient with them, and so I'm open to the fact that is right. But like I said, you were watching this last night, and it's we're charging. The phrase that stuck out to me was, that woman who's on the walkie-talkie inside the Capitol, and I think it was Kinzinger who says that she's being charged with seditious conspiracy. It's like, how Okay, so how is Donald
Right.
Trump not guilty?
Well,
If that woman is guilty, I guess she was in the Capitol and he wasn't, but surely he was more central to the seditious conspiracy than the woman on the walkie-talkie.
you don't understand. Donald Trump is, I mean, he's on television, he's famous, and he has gold-plated toilets. So, I mean, obviously, we need to have a different standard. Okay, I'm being cynical here.
Yeah.
So, speaking of your next book, worse than whores, um, you have a great Not My Party about MBS and the shambolic trip by the president to the Mideast. You were not a fan of the fist bump
No.
or the fecklessness of that, and of course we're seeing all of these professional golfers going, okay, so how much did you say it would take for me to overlook the bone saw thing? And MBS continues to just play them. So, I mean, it's so easy in some of these cases. So, tell me about Joe Biden, MBS, PGA.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any lesson from everything that I've been writing about for the past month and talking about, it's that we have to look at the dangers of enabling of everyone who has a role in enabling dangerous people, right? And
Yeah,
at times,
yes.
all of us are called to be the turd in the punch bowl.
Yeah.
This is one of the central messages that I'm trying to offer, when it comes to Donald Trump, but it comes to other things. Like sometimes everybody in the chain has a responsibility to say, nope, not through me. This isn't happening through me. And on MBS, we're seeing the exact same thing that we're talking about the Republican consultant culture, where everyone sort of justifies it and rationalizes it and says, well, these guys are doing it and this guy's doing it, and we need the oil, we need it, and we need, his geopolitical role in challenging Iran. I don't know. I get all that. We talked about this once a couple months ago, Charlie, and you're like, maybe if there's a real politique element to some of this, and there are dangers in the region, and sometimes you have to deal with bad people, but that's not what is happening in a lot of these cases. I mean, Jared Kushner taking a $2 billion bribe from him is not real politique. That is a bribe. Okay, golfers, Hollywood, soccer, the Premier League, everybody, letting him sports wash, letting him clean his money through Hollywood. Lindsay Lohan flying there. Like every one of these people is a person in this chain that is giving him more power, more influence, and they also are giving one more little piece of evidence for everyone else in the chain to say, well, I guess we can just go along with this, right? I mean, it's not that big. I'm just one golfer. I'm just one golfer. Why is it my responsibility to say no to this? And eventually you get to a point where this becomes a very powerful man that can act with impunity. And he is. He killed Khashoggi, but it's not just that. There are American citizens that are still held hostage there. This was another failure of Biden's that I didn't really get into enough in the episode, but he did the fist bump, and everybody's like, well, you gotta do this because the geopolitical concerns about the region, because of gas prices. And it's like, okay, well, can we get a concession from? Why is it Biden that's making all of the concessions? From the PR standpoint to MBS, like, can we at least get a hostage out of the fist bump?
Okay, well,
I
this is
still
what.
wouldn't like that, but like, what do we get? Can we get something of substance to just demonstrate? But MBS is just getting
Cheap
away
oil.
with all this.
So I don't want to pile on anymore, but
Please do.
this seems to be a legitimate question. So Joe Biden goes over there and does the fist bump, and I know, okay, maybe it's overhyped, whatever. But what did we get from that? What was the success? Did we get the extra oil? Did I miss that? I mean, look, oil prices are going down. I mean, gas prices are going down. But it felt like we gave MBS a lot. He then urinated on our president from a great height. And what did we get?
Yeah, and the answer that I get, that will get pushback in the comments and the emails about
Yeah.
this, I get from the defense is, well, you don't really know, right? We don't know what kind of
Okay.
they're doing behind the scenes, and you got to keep them on side on various things. And I guess, but to me, this just seems like a bunch of diplomatic bullshit, and a lot of diplomatic self rationalizations, because they felt like that they were concerned about what was happening, with oil and the domestic political concerns. You have to, you don't have to tell us all the state secrets to come out and say, actually, there were some other diplomatic gains that we got out of this, right? And this is part of it. The PR element. You don't think that MBS is trading on this back home, right? Like that he's not to retain power. It wasn't exactly clear that MBS was going to take power. This is, talking about the Saudi domestic politics. Like there was a period of time where there was a kerfuffle between him and MBN, Mohammed bin Nayef. And there's some reason to believe that obviously MBN is not going to be a perfect person, not a classical liberal leader of Saudi, but that he is, a little less psychopathic than MBS. And so MBS uses all of this stuff in his domestic politics. The fact that, oh, well, look, I got the Trumps wrapped around my little finger. I got Biden giving me this fist bump for a PR thing. We're going to America to have a golf tournament at the former president's golf tournament. The second most famous golfer in the world, Phil Mickelson, is going to be shining my golden bone saw that we hand out to the winner.
Oh,
and so, right, I mean, he uses all of that at home. So the PR. Maybe there's some behind the scenes diplomatic stuff about this, but the PR also matters. What was the PR gain that we got? What was the thing that made MBS look a little small? Nothing. MBS looked big. Biden looks small. MBS looked big. Jared Kushner looks like a little runt begging for cash. This is happening over and over again, and somebody needs to say no. Fuck this guy. Actually, yeah. This is not, maybe we need to come up with new solutions, for instead of being completely just dependent on a psychopathic Middle Eastern oil despot. One man's idea.
One man's idea. Okay, so one last footnote to our discussion earlier.
Please.
And again, now bear with me, because people think I'm going to do this gratuitously, but
I'll bear with you.
It was kind of remarkable, sitting here in Wisconsin and watching this congressional hearing and the news networks broadcasting the word motherfucker last night. Because you know why? Because this week is the 50th anniversary of George Carlin being arrested for using the 7 words at Milwaukee's Summerfest. It was right here. 50 years ago, he was arrested in 1972 for obscenity. And this became this huge issue for free speech, and he began referring to the taboo words as the Milwaukee 7. Eventually, Milwaukee goes, we wouldn't want to humiliate ourselves. We're going to drop the case. But that happened right here. And on the 50th anniversary of George Carlin's arrest for using the 7 words, all of America gets to hear motherfucker on all the major networks in the Congress of the United States. So,
I love it. I didn't know that.
Slow cap for that little tidbit of local and national history. Tim Miller, thanks for coming on. Keep going with the book. Congratulations. Our New York Times best-selling author, Tim Miller. Always good to have you on Fridays.
Charlie, appreciate you. See you next week.
Thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. On Monday, of course, will be Amanda Carpenter and Will Salatan. I will be back on Tuesday, and we'll do this all over again.
You loved Lala Kent on Vanderpump Rules. Now get to know her on Give Them Lala.
With her assistant, Jess.
Last night, Lisa wanted to clean out the fridge. And I was like, I can't lift anything. I'm not helping.
Number one, Lala was told she can't lift anything, you guys. So it's not like she's just like, I'm not lifting anything.
No, but I'm not helping. But even my friends know. I'll write you a check. I'll do some Venmo. I'll have something wired. I am not helping. I don't like it.
Give Them Lala. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.